We all know from history such concepts as New and Old World. The Old World is called Afro-Eurasia, a concept that emerged in Europe around 1493, after the Europeans learned about the existence of America. And accordingly, the New World is called the Americas, including North America and the USA in particular. Classical antiquity, or simply antiquity, emerged in Europe. These are masterpieces of architecture and art, which in Europe have been preserved, or they at least try to preserve them. Well, what about in the US? We unfortunately stayed away from antiquity or not? Let's look together at the architecture of the New World. In front of you is the Woolworth Building, the headquarters of the Frank Winfield Woolworth Company retail chain. The Woolworth Building was built by architect Cass Gilbert, whom Frank Woolworth hired in 1910. The building was originally planned to be 190.5 meters or 625 feet tall, but then Woolworth decided to build the tallest skyscraper, and the building was eventually raised to 792 feet or 241 meters. When was the first skyscraper built in the United States, if in 1910 such high-rises were built? Search engines for the query "America's first skyscraper" sometimes give such a mysterious result. All the houses are in the beautiful style of antiquity. For example, in the center, where the columns at the very top, is not Europe hidden under such a cultural layer. The fantastic building on the left draws attention. The Gothic skyscraper is called Tribune Tower, located in Chicago. According to official sources, Chicago is the birthplace of skyscrapers. Stone City was very badly damaged after the fire that occurred in 1871 and actually began to rebuild again because most of the stone skyscrapers burned. As one website says, the world's first high-rise building was erected here in 1885. Let's put St. Ouen Cathedral next to it, dating back to the 15th century. But I think the resemblance to the Notre Dame de Paris Cathedral is obvious. And this is Broad Street, Philadelphia, 1905 photo. A whole antique street. That's Europe for crying out loud. As far as floors, antique and ancient cities of Europe turned out under the ground. Cut the photo under these edges and you will see all the same ancient cities of Europe and Russia. The Metropolitan Opera is an opera house located at 1411 Broadway in Manhattan, New York City. According to the official version, it was built in 1883 near Times Square. It was demolished in 1967 and performances were moved to Lincoln Center. And here is the current look of the place. Equitable Life Building, Manhattan. Construction began in 1868 and was completed in 1870 under the direction of Equitable's president, Henry Baldwin Hyde. In 1912, it was destroyed by a fire that killed 6 people, which is curious enough because the building is stone. In 1915, the 40-story Equitable building was built on the site just 3 years later. The next Wanamaker building was a popular department store on Broadway. The full-block building at 770 Broadway was built in 2 phases, 1903-07 and 1924-25. In 1903, John Wanamaker hired the Chicago architectural firm of D.H. Burnham & Co. to design his new building as an extension to the original. Daniel Hudson. Burnham was known for his early skyscraper designs and gained national fame in 1890 when he was selected as consulting architect for the World's Columbian Exposition held in Chicago in 1893. Wanamaker's closed in 1955, and the cast-iron building to the north burned in a fire shortly thereafter in 1956. Note the cast-iron building. What was the point fires in 1956? The post office and City Hall courthouse were designed by architect Alfred Bolt Mallet in City Hall Park, south of New York City Hall. The Second Empire-style building, built between 1869 and 1880, was not well received. Commonly referred to as Mallet's Monster, it was demolished in 1939, and the site was used to expand City Hall Park to the south. Write in the comments, "This building is a monster. Would you tear down this building?" The Singer Tower at Liberty Street and Broadway was a 47-story office building built in 1908 as the headquarters of the Singer Manufacturing Company. It was demolished in 1968, along with the adjacent City Investing Building, this little naturally ugly complex. When it was torn down, it became the tallest building ever demolished, and is now the third tallest building ever demolished, and the tallest building intentionally demolished by its owner. See the following antique high-rises. The New York World, New York Tribune, and New York Times newspaper news buildings were located near the City Hall courthouse. If you trim across the tops of the buildings, what do they remind us of? The left New York World Temple. In the center, a chapel or a train station. The third building is a cathedral. The World and Tribune buildings were demolished in 1955 and 1966, respectively. The Times building still stands, though the newspaper is no longer in it. In May 1966, Pace University announced that it would demolish the New York Tribune building to make way for One Pace Plaza as part of a large-scale redevelopment of the surrounding area. The modern architecture is unparalleled. New York World Building. The building was designed by George Brown Post in the Renaissance style and served as the headquarters of the New York World after its completion in 1890. The New York World Building was the tallest building in New York City upon completion, becoming the first to surpass Trinity Church, and was reportedly the tallest building in the world. And here's the view from the dome of this building. I think we're looking at Paris, not New York. The Gillinder Building was built in the financial district in 1897, but stood for only 13 years. It was demolished in 1910 and replaced by a larger building that consolidated the neighboring lot. Once again, we note the ugliness of the building. It's a joke, of course. In Europe, the building would look like this. It is impossible to list all of the buildings, but I suggest just a few that I find interesting. Lewiston Stadium was an open-air amphitheater on the City College of New York campus that opened in 1915. It was demolished in 1973 to make way for a new academic center. What was the climate like in New York? Like Rome, I guess. The original Waldorf Astoria Hotel opened in 1897 and combined the Astor and Waldorf hotels. It was demolished in 1929 to make way for the Empire State Building, and the hotel moved to 301 Park Ave. Well, if you thought arches were only built in Paris, you're wrong. Victory Arch was erected near Madison Square Park in 1919 after the end of World War I. In addition to the arch, check out the columns next to it. It all looks antique. Guess why it was torn down? It was a temporary wooden structure that was eventually torn down. And then there's the Dewey Arch, a triumphal arch that stood from 1899 to 1900 in Madison Square, Manhattan. It was erected for the victory in the Battle of Manila Bay in the Philippines in 1898. It was made of plaster and began to crumble immediately after the parade. An attempt to raise money for a stone one was unsuccessful. It's from Wikipedia, it's bullshit. Well, my dear viewers, the journey through the antique USA is over. We were mostly in New York. And if these buildings had been preserved, what would New York be like now? But as history knows, there is no subjunctive mood. In the comments, where would you like to live in the USA? In antique or modern architecture with only skyscrapers? Thank you all for watching, and please like and subscribe. Until new videos.